Good morning and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the pint-sized podcast that, if you down, gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me in the Zoom call is Sam Coates of Sky News, and it is Monday, September the 9th, Sam, and the leaves are starting to fall off the trees. The wind is getting up. It's getting a little bit darker and a bit colder. And in Westminster, that only means one thing. The start of the 4-week party conference season is getting underway, and we will soon be getting on our travels. Exciting times.
It is. Just to remind you, we've relaunched this autumn to give you everything you need to know about what's coming up each day in British politics. So by the time you listen to this, we've read the papers, watched the interviews, spoken to the advisors and the politicians, digested it all, and then tell you all in this podcast. And if you've got any questions about what we do, why we do it, want to know anything about the political scene or how it's covered, do WhatsApp us. Leave us a voicemail note on 07511 867 633. That's 07511 867 633. We'll play it and we'll answer it because we want you to understand how we go about things.
I had quite a chill weekend, Sam, because I've given up drinking for a few days between the summer season and the party conference season. But the luckiest members of Westminster have already been to a party conference. It was the Green Party conference over the weekend. I'm guessing that didn't cross your radar, though we have to say they are now a force in British politics with several MPs. But it gets off a bit more in earnest today with the Trade Union Congress in Brighton. The Lib Dems are down in Brighton this coming weekend. And then it's Labour in Liverpool, and then finishing off with the Tories' weird leadership contest conference in Birmingham at the very end of the month. How many of those are you going to be taking in on your travels, Sam? I remember during the election how much time we spent talking to you from various beige-coloured hotel rooms. Is it going to be like that again this month, do you reckon?
I'll be jumping on a train from Victoria down to Brighton a little bit later this morning, Jack, because I'm off to the TUC, which for the first time in 14 years matters like it hasn't done before. That's because, of course, the trade union movement are an inherent part of the Labour movement, and several trade unions are officially affiliated to the Labour Party, which means that they have direct formal links, which means that they can fund it, they can influence it or try and influence it. And that's exactly what they're going to be doing down in Brighton today and tomorrow.
There you go. Beer and sandwiches with Sam Coates doesn't get any better than that, does it, on a Monday? Let's just quickly run you through all the stuff that's coming up this week before we get into the day ahead, given it's Monday morning. Try and get your brains in gear for a week in British politics. As Sam says, the TUC will dominate the early part of the week down in Brighton. We're hearing from Paul Nowak, the TUC leader, will be speaking this morning. And in Westminster, Keir Starmer is hanging out with Idris Elba today for a knife crime summit in number 10. But I think the real attention of the lobby journalists will be down at the meeting of the parliamentary party this evening. The Labour MPs getting together behind closed doors, where they will be addressed by no longer the Shadow Chancellor, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, to talk about winter fuel payments and all the rest of it. And also arriving into Britain today is Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, for a 2-day visit. So that will create headlines as well. And that's ahead of a trip Keir Starmer's got to the White House later in the week.
You've also today got the new powers for local authorities to run their own bus services. You'll remember that Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, introduced powers to do this, started doing this in the last year or so. They want to give powers, this government, to other authorities, to other local authorities, to be able to do the same, to try and stop what they call the postcode lottery of bus provision. So that's quite a big thing for them. You've got round 2 tomorrow of the Tories voting in their leadership contest. That will determine who goes through to sort of the beauty parade of Tory conference at the end of the month. There is that all-important vote on winter fuel payments being taken away from 10 million pensioners. You've got a really awkward moment for this government, which is the prisoner release in order to stem the overcrowding in our jails. We learned this morning a high proportion of the 1,700 prisoners being released will be domestic abusers. That's the claim in the Times. Also, we've got a big update as part of this sort of foreign affairs strand to the week from John Healey, the Defence Secretary, in the Commons on Ukraine. That's in the early part of the week. But a lot of attention internationally will be on that Kamala Harris, Donald Trump debate late on Tuesday night.
Yeah, all of that happening on Tuesday. That's tomorrow. Wednesday, we've got PMQs as normal, as you'd expect, although Rishi Sunak did a bit better than we expected, I would say, last week. We've also got the selections of the select committee chairs. They will finally get up and running. That will be a bit of a thing in Westminster on Wednesday. Thursday, we've got the Darzai review. That is the big review that's going to sort of preclude NHS reform. It's going to be one of the big things the government tries to do this autumn. And check this out, Sam. Guess who else is in town on Thursday? Nick Clegg is speaking at Chatham House in a Q&A. We haven't heard from him from a while, but the retro is all the rage these days, so we'll look forward to see what he's got to say about democracy and social media. And then Friday, Keir Starmer is in America. He's going to Washington for a bilat with Joe Biden. But most interesting thing about that bilat, I suspect, is that we're expecting Kamala Harris to be in the room for that as well. And then the real action starts in Brighton on Saturday with the Lib Dem conference, which will be a 4-day shindig down there by the seaside. Are you going to that one as well, Sam?
Oh, of course, I'll be there from Sunday.
Of course you will. Of course you will. Because what else would you want to do? Should we crack on with the day ahead? Because it's a busy looking Monday for the people at the top of the Labour Party, because it's been 6 weeks, Sam, since Rachel Reeves announced these cuts to winter fuel allowance for pensioners. She might have hoped that by now the story might have died down a little bit. Quite the opposite has happened, though. It's on pretty much every front page this morning, or at least half of them, because the discontent amongst Labour MPs is growing. The upset and unrest within the party is growing rather than ebbing away, and Labour have got a real job on their hands to try and contain this, because, as we said, there is a vote happening in the House of Commons on Tuesday afternoon where Labour MPs are going to have to either voice their opposition, vote against the government, go and hide and not want to be seen voting for this thing, or they're going to have to hold their noses and come out and vote for this cut. And for Rachel Reeves, she's got a big piece of work on her hands tonight when she addresses all the Labour MPs in the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting behind closed doors to try and explain to them why she's made this decision, why it's a good idea, why one of the first big things that Labour is doing in power after 14 years of waiting is taking money away from pensioners, and that is going to be a very difficult message for her to sell.
I think it's important to say from the outset that there is an awful lot of attention going on this rebellion, but when it happens in the Commons, and undoubtedly some will rebel, nothing will change. So it's a really curious insight into the early growing pains of this Labour Party, but a handful of Labour MPs will probably abstain. Maybe less than 10 of them, as we were saying last week, will actually vote against this policy. But Keir Starmer has a 167 strong working majority, and therefore that will amount to very little. What we have is leadership that are determined to stand firm, a leadership that are basically making the argument behind closed doors. Look, if our argument are things are tough, we have to take the tough decisions. You know, how can you then go and U-turn or even throw money to try and make that cliff edge that the winter fuel payment has created any less bad? They dispute that the polling is that bad, and they dispute that the numbers of people involved in the rebellion are of any kind of level that's particularly making them turn heads. So there's a lot of focus on this. But the question is, here we have a rebellion, but to what end?
And I think that is going to be a theme of this parliament. When a government has won a majority this big, it's going to be nigh on impossible for any rebellion to actually defeat the government in the House of Commons. I would be amazed if that happens at any point in this parliament, unless Keir Starmer does something completely crazy. So it's more about the size of the rebellion and what does it tell us about the feelings within the party. How is Keir Starmer managing this enormous new intake of MPs, most of whom have only been MPs for a few weeks, and suddenly they're already facing all these angry emails, all these angry letters, or at least that's what they're saying they're getting from people out in their constituencies. And how does Keir Starmer cope with that? But you're completely right. There is no way that they have the numbers to try and stop this from happening. It clearly is going to happen. And I think the idea that the government are going to U-turn on this is completely for the birds. You know, they've been very, very clear how they feel about this. They can't come in here and they say that you've got to make tough decisions. You had Lucy Powell on the telly the other day saying if they hadn't done this, there might have been a run on the pound. So you can't then turn around and not do it. But I guess it's possible that what we might hear from Rachel Reeves is an attempt to mitigate a little bit. It's possible they could come up with something that sort of smooths the edges and says, well, we're still going ahead with this as we said we had to. However, we have been able to do this for a certain subset of pensioners, or something like that, to try and, you know, throw a bone to some of their backbenchers and show that they are still, you know, the party that cares about about poorer people in this country.
So I think the question for me is, what are the longer term consequences of this discussion, this debate and this rebellion? The first, I think it'll tell us a little bit about the difference between number 10 and number 11. I think my sense is inside number 10 and number 11, inside, Rachel Reeves' department, they are really very hardcore, that they can't even throw more money to shave some of the hard edges off this policy. You'll hear a lot about the 1.6 million pensioners who fall below the poverty line but won't be eligible to keep the winter fuel payment after these changes. That's the cliff edge. It's that nearly 2 million pensioners who don't qualify but will lose out. But I'm getting people kind of around the Treasury saying, look, if you throw more money at it, you will look weak. This is all about savings. I think it generates just over 1 billion quid. We've got to find 22 billion pounds by October the 30th. So throwing money at the problem to satisfy the concerns in itself will be counterproductive. But I think there's a little bit more... I think there's just a little bit more awareness inside number 10 of the pressures that are coming down the track. But they also know that you give into this, you give into a lot. And on the sort of scale of things, rebellions, revolts, challenges that they're facing, at the moment, they're kind of ranking this below the criticism they've had over the party's policy on Gaza. I think they think that the decision to commit and keep the two-child benefit policy in place will be a bigger issue by the time they get to conference. So they're weighing up the size of the anguish about this, but there are frankly bigger things that they're going to give into. But let's watch how number 10 and number 11 just rub along on this. It just feels to me like number 10 is slightly more aware of the pain that it's causing.
Just one sort of semi-side issue on this, Sam, that it struck me. Like, this issue had sort of bubbled away a bit last week. It was always going to come back this week because of the vote. But it was rather blown up again on Thursday due to a very prominent Labour Party commentator wading in on it and saying that Rachel Reeves might need an escape route. Now, that person was Ed Balls, who used possibly one of the most prominent Labour figures to speak about Treasury matters. Also, the husband of a member of the cabinet who sits around the table with Rachel Reeves every week. What is Rachel Reeves thinking when she hears Ed Balls come out saying this is a big problem, it's going to get worse, they need an escape route, it's not just a storm in the teacup? Incredibly unhelpful comments for the first Labour Chancellor of 14 years. Rachel Reeves will be sitting down with Yvette Cooper tomorrow. Are they going to have a little chat about that? Could you ask your husband just to tone it down a little bit? My job's bloody hard enough as it is. Thank you very much, Yvette. Interesting dynamic, I think.
And when I put the Ed Balls comments to somebody in government, they quoted back at me, get this, the response of George Osborne, Ed Balls' podcast partner and former Conservative Chancellor, and they said, no, but George Osborne says if you throw money at this, you look weak. It's quite something when bits of the government are having to quote the former Tory Chancellor to rebut the former Labour Shadow Chancellor at the moment. Anyway, absolutely fascinating stuff. A reminder, there are so many more spending pressures to come. Unison have totted up the black hole they claim in council finances. That amounts to £4.3 billion. The spending demands go on and on and on, all in a context where Rachel Reeves is going out and asking Whitehall departments for cuts which some bits of Whitehall say are unachievable and will end up being reversed. There is a bit of push me pull you about the whole public finance situation.
Let's talk a bit more about the TUC, as you mentioned, Unison. I mean, the winter fuel payments issue has been raised by senior figures in the TUC, so I'm sure there'll be some debate on that today down in Brighton as the Congress gets on with its second day. But I think, the bigger stuff they're going to be talking about, I assume, Sam, is the workers' rights bill that we're getting from Labour in some draft form in the next few weeks. They promised that in their first 100 days of government, which takes you to early October. And the unions, I think they feel like they're pretty much going to get what they want. There was a lot of talk about Labour U-turning or rowing back on some of the policies. That's not what unions are expecting. At least they say they're not. Although I'm sure with these things, the devil is always in the detail. And maybe what we'll get next month is just the start of a long consultation. And you never really quite know where the detail of these policies are going to end up until the very last minute. And those little nuances can make all the difference to whether business is actually pretty happy with where we've ended up versus is whether the unions get all their demands. But it's another big one that's going to kick off this autumn once we see the real detail of the policy.
There is a consciousness at the top of government about what the picture looks like on November the 1st and whether or not this government can credibly still call itself a government whose main priority is growth. Because November 1st will be after the tax rises of the budget, the spending cuts on projects in the budget. It'll be after that workers' rights bill has been published. The commitment is to do it in the first half of October, so it's within the first 100 days. I know that there are people at the top of government who just think that will end up edging yet further in a pro-business, less worker-friendly direction, but that hasn't happened yet, and probably largely, as you say, by just consulting on everything for a long period of time. We'll know then whether or not the Prime Minister backs the smoking proposals to ban smoking outside pubs, which will cause quite a lot of anguish for the hospitality business, another anti-growth measures, as some would cast it. The whole dynamic of this government, whether it reaches for regulation and more state solutions or allows business to grow and enterprise to thrive, as Rachel Reeves promised over and again in the election campaign. One Labour supporting consultant who works a lot with business says so far business has been quite disappointed. Will there be a correction in the next few weeks in the tone of this government when it comes to supporting business and growth?
Keir Starmer should be addressing the TUC tomorrow, Tuesday, we think. Ahead of that, we've got Angela Rayner there tonight, Sam. She's giving an after-dinner speech to the TUC's General Counsel. I don't think they're letting journalists into that one, I'm afraid, but you'll have to press your ear to the door and find out what was said, because, again, I'm sure workers' rights will be the main thing. She's a much more popular figure amongst the TUC, I would say, rather than Keir Starmer, who so maybe she'll be the sort of after-dinner act that goes down well before he comes and delivers a bit of hard pain tomorrow. Should we talk about the Tories? We used to do the 2-minute Tories at the end of this podcast. Should we do it again? It's all kicking off over the weekend in the Tory leadership contest. It started out as very nicely mannered, mild-mannered contest. There's not much briefing against each other. Fair to say that's over now. The Sunday papers were absolutely full of vitriol from the various camps pointed at each other. As we get down to the business end of this competition, the next round of voting amongst MPs is tomorrow, Tuesday, and ahead of that, on Monday afternoon, there is a hustings event before Tory MPs where the 5 remaining candidates will slug it out. And this time, Sam, according to our playbook email this morning, rather than just taking it in turns to speak and then leaving the room, they'll all be lined up together side by side, and it will be a full-on throwing questions at them all battle, which gives a much better opportunity, I think, for them to make barbed comments about each other and slag each other off than we got last time, which should be highly entertaining for the MPs present. Sadly, journalists aren't invited to that one either, but we can all imagine what will be going on.
That format, I'm sure, unconsciously much closer to the US presidential debate that we're going to get tomorrow night, but no less in stature our 5 Tory friends. Look, the point at the moment is that there's a battle for the 14 votes that Priti Patel had when she was kicked out of the contest last week. The 2 people on sort of close to each other in bottom place, Tom Tugendhat, who got 16 votes, Mel Stride on 17 votes. So it's who goes out of those 2 potentially, or is there a shock and an upset with James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick losing out? Because the margins, of course, are so small. I have to say, there were lots of stories in the weekend papers about skullduggery. And by skullduggery, what we mean are different campaigns lending votes to alternative candidates in order to ensure that the final 2 are as favourable for their person as they can get. But so long as the rules allow this kind of behaviour, allow what's known as proxy voting, so an MP can hand their vote to one of the campaigns to do with it as they will, then this is going to happen. This is all the consequence of choices by the party. I don't even think you could call it skullduggery. It's just, it's the game they want to play, and they're playing it.
The Tories only know one sort of game, and it always involves skullduggery. Shall we leave it there? I think that's enough for a Monday morning, isn't it? There's going to be loads to talk about on Tuesday, so I think we better give listeners a little break and say we'll see you all tomorrow.
See you then.